How's it going, man?
It's going good. Going good. Just I'm here in Boise. That's where my wife and I live, and we actually just got our first snow of the year this morning.
I
So
like the
just
holiday vibes, man, going on
I know.
behind you. That's my kind of party. That's so funny. I spent probably 4 hours yesterday hanging all the Christmas lights.
I saw in your story your street was all,
Dude,
dark and everything.
so I live on the west coast of Canada. I live in Vancouver, BC.
Okay.
And I grew up in Ontario, which is like not East Coast, but like kind of right above Michigan. And
Yeah.
when I grew up, Christmas was a huge deal. Winter in general was a huge deal. Like where I lived in this small town, and there was like a Christmas tree light walk that you would do every
Mhm.
year. And it was like, yeah, hyper Christmassy. Vancouver is terrible. But I don't know if this is just a function of like a change in society. Like, I don't know if I went back to my old town, if it would be kind of crappy too. I feel like, and I don't want to throw it all on like this like woke movement, but I feel like people are opposed to any traditions, even when they're like positive traditions for some people. But I just don't. It's so I have a 9-year-old daughter. So every year I kind of go overboard on the Christmas lights because I want her to have those same memories that I did. Like, and I love, dude, I wake up at 5 in the morning. I go upstairs. The Christmas tree is lit. The rest of the lights are out. I can see the like blinking Christmas lights coming in from the front window. And it just makes me like warm and fuzzy inside.
Yep.
Like, I just love it, man.
No, 100%. Yeah, we actually, not to be like a Scrooge, but we opted to not do Christmas lights this year just because my leg. So like I couldn't really physically do it. Number one, and number two, like we just moved into this house this last month, and life has just been so crazy.
I
Nothing
get it.
bad. It's just been like holy smokes. Like we're just kind of feels like we've been just drinking out of a fire hydrant the last little bit, and so we both were just like, let's just like kind of take a pause this year. Like we'll decorate the whole inside of the house, do everything,
Yeah.
and there's lots of little stuff around here. Like they had a Christmas tree lighting just here in our little town that we live in outside of Boise. And it was, it's very Christmassy here. And our street is kind of the same way. I feel like there's a lot of people, because we live in a new construction neighborhood, kind of the same boat where they just got in here like the same time we did. And they're just like, let's just kind of like chill.
Yeah.
But there's been some nice decorations on our street too. But I think next year will be full bore because I don't know. I'm right there with you. I'm all for having just going all out for Christmas and everything because it's a special time of year.
I love it, dude. I feel
Yeah.
like I got to come to Boise. Like so many of my favorite people. I just had Brad from Argali on the podcast a couple of
Yeah.
weeks ago. I feel like so many of my favorite people are from Boise. I feel
Yeah.
like it's the like less popular Bozeman.
Yeah, no, it's I think it's definitely getting popular. My wife and I, like I said, just moved here in October. So kind of what like brought us over here was just, more work in the hunting industry for me,
Yeah.
number one, but also just more work in general because I do stuff outside of the hunting industry as well. So just trying to find a place where I can have a little bit more, like a bigger pond, so to speak, to
Yeah.
fish in with
Where
work.
were you before this?
Like Southeast Idaho over by Idaho Falls.
Okay.
Which we loved it over there too, just on the other side of the state. But there's just more opportunity for me and
Yeah.
more opportunity for my work to not have to, be so much travel based and get me away from home as much. And hopefully, looking forward to having kids and stuff in the years to come, having a little bit more, just local work that I can have. So, but yeah,
For sure.
so far we love it. It seems like a really great place to raise a family, lots of outdoor stuff, lots of really good people that we've met just in a short amount of time. And yeah, we're loving it.
I've never hunted Idaho. I've had 2 tags in Idaho. I got an elk tag back when you could still like just get an over the counter elk tag and it wasn't like this big, rigmarole. And I think it was for is it Lemhi or Lemhi?
Lemhi. Yeah.
Lemhi. So it was for the Lemhi and it was the year COVID hit. And
Oh,
so
dang.
couldn't cross the border. And I remember hitting up Idaho Fishing Game. I'm like, come on, man. Like, I didn't know the border was going to shut 2 weeks before my hunt or whatever
Oh yeah.
and they like zero mercy, man. They're like, no, tag's
Dang.
gone. And then,
That's a bummer because I mean they make you as a
know.
non-resident. I don't know at what time of year you got the tag, but I know they go on sale in December, and like December was about 3 months give or take before COVID and all that hit. So it's just
Yep.
like I feel like they would have given you some mercy. That's a bummer, but there's a lot of things that got burned up with that stuff.
100%. And I think I was trying to wait till the last minute. I think the smart move, because there's certain, if you turn it back within certain dates, you can get certain percentages back. And I think the smart move would have been in like May or June to be like, listen, too risky. Let's at least get 50% of my money back. But I just kept thinking maybe the border will open, maybe the border will open. And then this year I got a mule deer tag for like, I think it was is the 10th to the 24th make sense? That's a mule deer season in Idaho, right?
In October. Yeah.
So I had a 10th to the 24th, and then I ended up buying mule deer tags, like an outfitting business in Alberta, and my 2 weeks of hunting like directly overlapped with that. So I feel like I've got a mini curse going with Idaho. Like I keep getting tags. And then this year I got in the lineup for the sale. The number assigned to me was 6,800, which for anybody who's been in that sale, like 6,800 is not bad. Like you might have a chance at something. And last year I fell victim to FOMO. So this year I did all my research in front. I wanted archery elk. That was the only thing I was interested in, because I got to outfit mule deer every year. So that like late October thing isn't an option for me. I think I had, and for people listening, the way that it works in Idaho is that they release elk tags in regions, which are a combination of like 2 to 5 units, depending on kind of where it is. And so I think I had maybe 5 regions that are like, okay, this is my A list. If I can get one of these, I'm getting it. And by the time mine came up, the very last one disappeared like 1,000 people before mine. And I was like, oh, I think 90% of the people in that room are there for elk. Because I was just watching like elk tags go, elk tags go, elk tags go. Once they were all gone, people kind of started buying the mule deer tags, but I don't feel like there's nearly the amount of mule deer interest in that early access lineup as there is for elk.
Yeah, which I mean, Idaho has great mule deer hunting, especially like a lot of the general units. Like I definitely think it's up there in terms of like the western states. But yeah, elk is king, just how it goes.
Yeah. So no Idaho for me again next year. So let's back up a little bit here. So for people listening, this is Luke Dusenbury. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
It's close enough. Yeah, it's okay. Dusenbury. But
Dusenbury. All right.
Very close.
Dusenbury. Now, I've known about you for quite some time because I've seen Brady posting about going on hunts with you. And I was like, damn, like Brady does some pretty full on stuff. And I was like, this guy's got to be kind of hardcore. And then I don't ever, this is going to sound bad because I make my own films, but I don't ever really research like who's doing the shooting and editing on some of the GoHunt films and some of the other films that I watch. But then the one in particular, and the reason I watched out, was that you recently did a film for GoHunt called, is it One Last Chance or One Good Chance?
One Good Chance, yep.
One Good Chance. And it was a film with Trail. And so, yeah, background, you shoot and edit hunt films, and we're going to get into your background and all that kind of stuff. But I just want to set a little bit of context because I found this hunt particularly impressive, and I want to share a few reasons why I found it impressive. For anybody who's ever tried to shoot the style of hunt that hunt was, which is essentially a hunt in a heavily roaded unit where there's decent action, a pretty monotonous landscape. There's not any real like hero pictures or hero shots in a landscape like that. And because it's heavily roaded, the reason I like filming backcountry hunts is that, and I know it sounds cheesy, but Gary Vee has this thing, document, don't create. And it's one of my mantras when I'm solo filming is that like, if I try and overlay story, it always feels fabricated. And if you're just in the backcountry, especially by yourself, weird shit just happens. You know what I mean? Like as long as the camera is rolling, I think my mic's a little hot, just a sec. As long as the camera is rolling, you are going to catch a story because it's just man against man, man against nature. But in these heavily roaded units, dude, I've tried to film these and it's challenging to make a compelling story that's not just like guy driving, guy hiking, guy glassing phone scope footage. guy driving, guy glassing, guy's phone skull, like just because it's kind of all that ever happens. But I found right from the opening of this film, there was an immediate aesthetic. There was this story that kind of developed across the whole thing. And I was just really impressed with how cohesive a story it was, how well shot it was. I kind of wanted to dig into some other background stuff first, but maybe let's just hop right into that. How do you approach something like this? Like when you get the call, I don't know, who it is calls you from GoHunt. They're like, listen, Trail drew this tag, are you available for these dates? Walk me through your creative process a little bit. Like, how do you decide, okay, well, what's the aesthetic going to be like for this film? What's the story going to be? How much of that is pre-planned? How much of that is reactive in the moment? And then you kind of make up for it in the editing room later. I would just love to hear a little bit about your process, because I think that hunt in particular, we really saw like your creative influence, because that's not a hunt that would have naturally just had a story develop.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Jay. As someone who's like also been on a hunt like that, it's cool to like hear your perspective, like as a creator and shooter, but also like you're like, dang, like I know what it's like to film a hunt like that with those logistics that you're handed, because like every hunt you have different reality you're kind of placed in, and that's something that like one of my mentors kind of like impressed upon me like years ago, is just like hunting is just surrendering to the reality you're in, and that's just like a lot of things in life,
that's got to go on a t-shirt. I got to put a little timestamp. Surrender to the reality you're in. I love this. Yeah, that's great.
His name is Nate Bailey of Life Outdoors. He's a really, really good dude, a friend of mine, but he was my youth pastor growing up. But anyway, so that's just something he said to me years ago, and it just kind of stuck with me. And I think as a hunting filmer, videographer, I think that's like just the perfect way to put it, because it's just like you never know, like, and that's one of my favorite parts about my job is like I never know what the cards I'm going to be dealt. And I was kind of telling you before, like when we started talking before the podcast, like I do a lot of different types of work. I do a lot in the hunting industry, obviously, but I do other things as well. I do some weddings occasionally here and there. I do some music video stuff, like in the music industry. I do some stuff in the fishing industry. Just kind of like, I don't know, that's one of my favorite parts about my job is I never know where I'm going to get asked to go and what I'm going to get asked to do, what I'm going to get asked to capture, photo or video or both. Like it's, I don't know, I love how it just keeps me on my toes. But yeah, this hunt in particular, like, yeah, it was extremely challenging creatively. And I was like, and physically too, I would say like, it's a different ball game when you are road hunting for, I think it was day 9 he killed. But we put, I think 750 miles on his 4Runner.
Yeah.
In those 8 or 9 days. And like, it sounds like, we were just driving around the truck, but it's like, it beats up on you. Like those roads are bumpy and like
big time. You're
just waking up and you're just driving and getting out at random times, getting back in. And you're kind of like, you got all your stuff in your lap, like my camera, for example, and binos and a tripod, just in case I need to hop out and get something and like you kind of see in the film, like you just never know what's going to happen, like even down to the last second. But yeah, it's just,
I find sorry to interject too, but I find something underrated about these hunts is that psychologically, I find them actually more challenging to stay motivated. I find like on a backcountry hunt, once I kick over that line, I'm out of the truck, I'm past the trailhead, I'm just in go mode, and there's always hunting to be done. With those roaded hunts where you're in and out of the truck and you've got cell service and there's gas stations near, like, it's like you have to consistently reestablish your motivation. And I think that really takes a toll on your willpower. And I think that has a physical expense as well as a psychological expense over the course of the hunt that most people don't account for.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I had kind of talked to Trail before the hunt. I kind of like picked his brain on like, what should I expect? What should I bring? Just like, it's talking like the general stuff, like what kind of style are we going to do? What's the tent, base camp situation going to be like, what types of meals should I pack and those sorts of things. And originally we were thinking about maybe just having like a base camp, like wall tent or something, or a teepee with a stove. Cause I ended up bringing my wall tent and a propane heater, but I had it in the back of my truck. We just never ever set it up just cause it was just, when we got there, Trail had been there for a few days, just scouting before. And he was just like, you know what, like there's just so much area in this unit and there's so much roads. Like there's legitimately, no exaggeration, a road every half mile. Like there's no roadless, like, or there's no advantage really to getting out and like, backpacking in a few miles or spiking out somewhere. And like he'd been there for a few days and he's just like, I haven't seen like, what I'm kind of looking for in terms of like mature buck class and everything. Like he's like seen a lot of deer, seen a lot of bucks, but just not seeing that like upper tier, that like with that tag and with that unit, like that you're kind of looking for. So we just kind of opted, we're like, let's just kind of stay super mobile, have like, just everything in our trucks. And then we would just kind of like, basically we would kind of just drive a different section of the unit and like leave my truck kind of like at a central area. And then I would just hop in with him and film him driving around. And yeah, the creative side of it was like definitely a challenge, but I don't know. I enjoy the challenge, and it was something for me. I kind of knew that going into, I was just like, I'm going to have to like really be on it. Like trying to think of like creative angles. Like one of my favorite shots in the film is kind of early on when he's like glassing, and I knew, so he was about to start glassing with his spotter, and I knew he was going back to his truck to get something, and then he was going to come back and just plop down. And so like I had like manually focused like to infinity, so you could like kind of see all the way through the spotter, and he like kind of comes in out of focus.
Oh, I know this shot. I love this shot.
Yeah, but just like that kind of stuff, just like kind of playing around with like different things, because like you want to keep. If I'm interested out there, then most likely like the viewer will be interested. So like just trying to create little things that like interest me, or like there's like one time in the film I like was in my truck, and this is probably not the most legal thing, but it was on a dirt road, so it's here or there. And I was going like 5 miles an hour, but I just had my camera and I was just holding it and driving and filming him like in his truck. So it's kind of like a parallax effect. Just something like that. And I just kind of stabilized it in post. But yeah, just like little things like that, just trying to like get creative, with the cards you're dealt, and then just like never like giving up creatively, or never giving up on the story of just like legit, like we could come around the corner and out pops this buck out of a ditch. Like you just never truly know. And just being like committed to that, as like you said, as like just documenting, not creating. Like, cause if you just keep documenting, you're going to get those moments and those raw, just like, natural reactions and things like that. And like, I had such a good time out there with Trail. He's just such an awesome dude, and really got to know him really well. Like we'd been to Alaska together, so we had known each other pretty well and had a really good hunt on that one. But, this one was just a different level of just like, kind of like not seeing a lot of animals and struggling for a while, and then having, that what happened on the hunt with that bigger buck that we ended up losing, and just the ups and downs of everything. Like it was just a really good like bonding experience, and we made some good memories, and it all turned out in the end. And yeah, it was just one of my favorite hunts ever documented.
Do you make any type of creative decisions before going on one of these, like as far as aesthetic or storyline? Like, and it might be kind of nerdy, like, do you have color grades in mind? Do you have certain shots you're thinking of trying to get, or are you completely a blank canvas when you show up to these things?
I think it's good to have a relative sense of a blank canvas. Like you definitely want to go into a hunt like knowing like, hey, like anything can happen, and whatever happens, that's the direction we need to go. It's kind of like reacting to the defense kind of a thing. But I definitely try and always have like a little bit of pre-planning, either with like the creative director or marketing director or the hunter, just kind of talking about different ideas and things.
Oh, right, too, because they might have some brand goals even for the film that are like, okay, listen, there's some themes that we need, or whatever the case may be. I've never even thought about that, but that's like a third perspective that's going to have some input on the film as well. It's not just the hunter and the shooter. The brand has got to have some type of interest as well.
Yeah. So like from the brand side, like, with GoHunt, like with Insider and things like that, like he drew this tag with like incredibly low odds.
Yeah.
And he drew it because it was the hunt and adventure he was like seeking. And that's like another thing I always like when I'm talking to guys like about, they ask me questions like, I want to like do this in that hunt, or what do you think about this state, or what do you think about that hunt? And it always comes down to like, what's the adventure you want? Like I was just talking to a buddy of mine from college who's like, he was asking about like guiding to elk hunts and kind of my experience on some of them. And I was like, well, what's the adventure you want? You know what I mean? Yeah. And so that's kind of like going back to Trail, like he's just such an archery dude, and that's just what he eats, sleeps, and breathes and loves. And this hunt was that. And so just kind of talking about, that side of it, and how he drew it, and what after he drew it, like what was his plan, kind of a thing, like with e-scouting and things like that with GoHunt maps, and and then just taking that and then applying it to when he got to the field, and was just like, wow, there's like more roads than I thought. This is what the terrain looks like. There's not a lot of like cover, as crazy as it sounds. Like,
Yep.
we were like, and it was weird because like we'd find areas where like there's a lot of like juniper trees and things where it's like, oh, this looks like good mule deer habitat, and like we couldn't ever seem to pick a lot of deer out of there. They were all out in the open, and where there was just endless sea of grass, like not even a lot of sagebrush. And yeah, just a lot of things like that. We were just kind of like discovering, it's like, this hunt is very unique, very different. And just trying to like, and just continue to learn kind of as we went. But yeah, like I'd say like kind of going back, like going into the hunt, like that was kind of like the premise that we were talking about, but also just like the fact that it's late season archery deer and like anything can happen. And then, yeah, just being ready for whatever. So
the film inspired me on two different, well, from a filming perspective, we will get into it in a minute, but from an actual like hunting and application perspective in two different ways. So I've been applying in the Western states for a long time. I've been lucky. I've drawn a couple tags and had a couple seasons where I didn't get anything, and live in BC. So I always got over the counter options here. But I seem to go back and forth with like, there's years where I like go nuts, do crazy research, look for those little gem units. And him drawing that tag reminded me, and I'm going to do a podcast about this later on. Like, you really got to remember the states that have random draw pools, because those are the kind of states that no matter if you're trying to build points or not build points, you should always be applying in those states. Because I don't care if it's 0.28%. Like, listen, man, people win the lottery every week. Like, people get struck by lightning every week. Like, that could be you. And if you're in most of these states, you already got to pay for your license, and then you already got to pay a bonus point fee. It's like, you might as well shoot the moon. And if you're going to be building points, go out for those long shot odds. And then the other thing that landed for me, so I was building my application strategy for New Mexico this year, and I was looking at 3 mule deer units, and you have multiple choices. And like my first choice is like my perfect unit, prime tag, low draw odds, great, terrain. It's like a no brainer. That's my number one choice. And then these other 2, I found myself trying to talk myself into it. I'm like, oh, the success rate is pretty good. I've got some inside intel. It wouldn't be really bad. And then one good chance came to mind, and I'm looking at these units, and I'm like, I don't want to hunt these units. Like, this is not, and Trail talks about it a lot of times. He's like, listen, this is just not my favorite kind of hunting. And he won't apply there again, because it's like, it doesn't get him excited. And I'm looking at those units, and I'm like, this is not my kind of hunting. I don't like this. And so I'm just like, then just dump them. Because you're going to be talking yourself into doing something that isn't central to what your goal is. Like you're saying, for like, what's the adventure you want to have? And so maybe it means that I apply for less units, or maybe I apply for a unit with either slightly less draw odds, or maybe a slightly lower trophy potential, but the unit itself is the type of adventure I'm looking to have. And it was funny that film was so pertinent to the application season this year, because that's kind of exactly what happened.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you.
So one of the things that I thought you did very successfully in the film was convey a sense of like struggle and time in a condensed manner. And this is one of the things that I struggle with all the time, especially solo hunting and solo filming. And there's been examples of where I think I've done it well, and there's been examples of where I don't think I've done it well, but it usually results in me just taking more time. The film just ends up being longer because I'm trying to convey this like sense of monotony. And for me, by myself, this sense of isolation. So there'll be just like 15-second shot of me eating a peak at camp, completely silent. And when I'm in the editing room, I'm actually like, I make myself play it until I start getting physically uncomfortable watching it. And I'm like, there we go. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah. Like, I want the viewer to be like, God, why is he just sitting there? Because it's like, well, that's what it is. But I found in this film, you were able to convey that sense of monotony without what is it? Is it like a 42 or a 38-minute film? Like, it's not some hour and a half epic thing with like all these super long shots. How do you approach that from I guess both a shooting perspective, because you got to capture the shots you're looking for at the time, but also an editing perspective when you get back into the editing room and you're like, what kind of tactics are you using and how do you approach that, being able to communicate that sense of effort when you don't have these like 10-mile, 3,000-foot hikes to like do that job for you?
Yeah. So this was a 43-minute film, I think. It's actually the longest hunt film I've ever done.
I think it's a perfect length, by the way. I love like 35 to 45.
Yeah.
When they get down to like 18, I'm like, now we're just kind of talking highlight reel territory. It's not, I don't get emotionally invested.
Yeah. I like to never put a time limit on what I'm going to do. It just kind of, I let the story kind of dictate the time frame. Like I'd say a lot of mine have been that like 18 to 25, 27 minute mark. But this one, I just kind of knew, like going into the edit, like talking with the guys at GoHunt, I was like, this one's going to be longer. Like I can just kind of just tell even before I started cutting the footage.
Yep.
Just because I knew like the story arc and like kind of.
Well, you almost have two story arcs there as well, because you got the first big buck and then you got the second buck, and that, yeah.
And I wanted to do both justice, because they were both so unique in how they went down and everything like that. And so I was just like, let's just not put a time limit on it. And the GoHunt dudes are like, yeah, like as long as you want it to be, like, let's do it, kind of a thing.
That's awesome.
And there, we're kind of like messing around with like longer time frame formats of films and stuff like that. Just because I do, like you're saying, I do think if you can do it well and where it's like it flows, it's awesome. You just get to have more of that experience and really feel like you're like in the mind of Trail, or just like, walking behind him or in the passenger seat next to him on that hunt. But yeah, so kind of going back to what you're saying too, like about like the color grading and stuff, and like, what was your approach and everything like that with the film? Not to get like too nerdy, like you're saying, but like I knew the landscape was like kind of bleh, like kind of like it was like a lot of rolling hill. There wasn't any crazy snowy peaks or big timber or creeks or river. Like it was just like, and so I kind of wanted to make it just feel, I don't know, like I wanted to be a little bit more creative with the look and the color of it.
Yeah.
So I just kind of made it, I don't know, like I got some inspiration from like Dune a little bit, like just like kind of like making it more of like a muted color palette.
Yep.
Not a lot of like saturation. And I don't know, I liked what I was able to find with that and messing around with different clips. Because when I originally started, I was just going more like a true to life look. And then I kind of realized I'm like, everything looks so bland and it's winter in the desert. Everything is dead. Like,
yeah.
But
I don't think people understand how much like the color grade, the music selection, the shot pacing, like all of these things contribute to the mood of the film, which is why I find it like, I like yourself very rarely do any pre-planning, because it's like I'm making decisions without enough information. Like, how do I know? I almost have to get home and start watching the footage. And then to me, I get kind of infused with like a mood. I'm like, oh, this is like an upbeat film. We're going to have some livelier music and maybe a more saturated color grade, and things are going to be a bit more like spicy and bouncy. And then sometimes it's just like everything is like, oh God, like this was a grind, and the terrain is very severe. And so it's going to be like, really kind of eerie kind of music and all that kind of stuff. But sorry to interject, but I think that really aided in the communication of like the mood of the film was that color grade and the aesthetic of the film, because it aligned really well with the landscape and the struggle itself.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Yeah, I like I said, I love the color grading aspect, and just like fine tuning that, and it's one of my favorite parts of making a film in the editing process.
So one of the other things that I noticed that really like contributed to the overall aesthetic of this film was the use of B-roll. There's that one shot of that grass in the opening sequence, and I struggle a lot with B-roll, so I'd be interested to know how you approach it. Like, are you just capturing some random stuff, and then when you get back, you're like, oh, that's a nice little snippet, or do you have a more intense and intentional approach when you're out there? Because I do think it's a thing that can, I don't want to say make or break a film, but it adds that depth, or it just comes off as like, oh, that's just cheesy, crappy inserted B-roll that's not in alignment with what's going on here?
Yeah, I'd say there's definitely times where, I'm just seeing whatever interests me, kind of like what I was saying. There's like just trying to be like more, like just practicing like, okay, like what right now is interesting me? Like as I'm just sitting here, or standing here on this like dirt road, and then I just, like I said, see that grass and the lights hitting it a certain way, or see this like weird little bush that I have no idea what it is, but it looks cool and it's kind of unique, or this cactus or it's doing something. Yeah, just trying to be like a fly on the wall and just like almost viewing it as if I've never been in the desert or never seen this terrain before, and kind of taking that approach, like honestly, into every day. Cause like you can never have too much B-roll. And even like there's times in the film where I was just like, dang, I'm having to like really try and find more, or
Right.
going back to like day 3 to put some B-roll from that into like day 6, or just stuff like that. It just never hurts to have more of it. But the most important thing is the A-roll, and just making sure you have the audio just dialed, and you're still capturing a story. And sometimes sometimes, like for instance in the film, like what the craziest thing was when after we missed that, or couldn't find that big buck early on in the film, and we ended up just driving down this road 5 miles from where we were looking for him, and all of a sudden he's just boom bedded on the side of the road and jumps up and just in a half a second just gone. Like it happened so quick, and we were just both in awe. We're just like, that was the buck, and we're 5 miles from where we were. Like, and then it was just like boom, camera. Like by the time my camera had finally booted up, it was obviously gone. But just like a moment like that, like you just never know. And then just kind of like talking to Trail, like, dude, what just happened? Even though I know what just happened, but he doesn't know I'm recording it. Like just like things like that, I would say. Or I don't know, like a lot of times we'll just be chatting and he'll say something that's just like is really impactful, and I'll just like kind of subtly turn my camera on without maybe him knowing, and then kind of just maybe just kind of re-ask the question again, or bring it up again. I do that a lot sometimes if it's something that I wasn't able to catch. But I don't know, just always trying to have like your eyes and your ears on for anticipating something that the hunter is going to say, or anticipating something that's going to happen, or just I don't know, just always having your eyes and ears on is kind of what I say.
That's such an interesting tactic. I struggle more with filming group hunts than solo hunts. I always feel awkward talking in front of the camera when there's other people around. And in a solo hunt, I don't have anybody to talk to. So I think out my process on camera. So when I'm like looking at a hill or looking at a map, it feels very natural to me, because I'm having these thoughts anyways, to like turn the camera on and like, oh, I think I'm going to go up here. And then when I get back, I got lots of like stuff to cut from. And when I go on a hunt with other people, I find I forget that, because I'm like, we just start talking. And then before I know it, the conversation's over and we're walking up the hill, and I'm like, shit, that was what I'm supposed to be filming, because that's going to be the setup for what we're about to do, or what we're about to go and do. And one of the interesting things I find about Trail, I know Trail pretty well. We've been talking for multiple years. He's a very introverted guy. And I was shocked when he was as good at the podcast as he is. I literally think he's one of the best like outdoors podcast hosts going right now. He's interested, he's engaged, he knows when to talk, when not to talk. He keeps the conversation flowing, but it's almost at odds with his personality. But maybe it's not that confusing, because I'm also introverted, but I like podcasts because I like meaningful conversations with a small number of people, not meaningless conversations with a large group of people. And that's what a podcast is by nature. But I could see how that same element of Trail's personality could make him challenging to film with, because he's not going to be the guy that's going to be like action and then turns and then just delivers this eloquent monologue. He's going to be the guy that says all kinds of profound shit, but he's not really going to think about the fact that he's saying profound stuff when he's saying profound stuff. So it would be quite the challenge to catch that stuff, because I could see him feeling awkward if you were like, okay, I've got the camera going. Can you just repeat the last 3 minutes of what you just said?
Yeah. And I would say I never really had a challenge with that, because like I mean, it was just Trail and I. So a lot of times I was just filming him, and I can't remember exactly how many hours I had after this hunt film, but I want to say it was in the 20 hour range of just because like if we're just sitting there like on a spotter watching this buck, like I was just filming him talk. So there was, like I said, there wasn't a lot of times where I had to ask them to re-say something just because I was just rolling with them, just because it was, that was the only thing we had going on. Like we didn't have to worry about, oh, we need to like, get back and collect water and hike it back to camp. It was just like, we're just out here. And in some ways, like, yeah, it was a creative challenge with some of the logistics, but in other ways, it was just like, I was able to plug my camera in literally to the cigarette lighter and charge it. Like I never had a dead battery,
Yeah.
So there's the good side of that too. But yeah, I'd say like working with Trail on that hunt and other hunts, like he's actually is really good on camera. And like, he's one of those guys, like he doesn't have a lot to say at times, but when he does have stuff to say, you listen. And I think the same thing on the Big Hunt Guys podcast. He's just, very interested, very passionate guy. And I think introverted, extroverted, whatever you want to call it, like that, as long as you're passionate, that's the biggest thing. Because like I would like people call me like an extrovert because I love being around people and I feel refreshed being around people, but like I am kind of more naturally quiet. So like it's kind of like one of those things is just like I think it's more about like the introverted extroverted definition is like, do you feel refreshed being around people and having like, community or, just like a get together or something or in good conversation, or do you need, time to kind of like decompress or time to, just have like alone time kind of a thing. Then like, I'm one of those people that's like, I don't really need alone time. I would prefer to be around people. And I feel very refreshed just being around people. So
I think that's a great way because I'm the opposite. And I've heard that kind of definition before. I get drained by being around people, but I'm very comfortable in front of a lot of people. And for me, the other element of introversion and extroversion that doesn't get explained enough is that a lot of my discomfort comes from like ambiguity around roles. Like if you put me into like some random networking situation, I lose my mind. My palms get sweaty. I don't know who to talk to. I hate it. If you ask me to go deliver a keynote in front of 500 people, I got this. Like it doesn't even faze me because I understand what my role is. Like I'm here to do this. You're here to do that. You all know who I am. I know who you all are. And it's like things are very clear. I feel like I would have done very well in like a Victorian era where things were like overly like scripted and there was all these like social protocols that everybody filled because you knew what you were supposed to do in social situations. And that's the part that's where I get very awkward and uncomfortable is when I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So let's nerd out here a little bit. What's your camera bag look like when you film a hunt like this?
Yeah, like I said, on a hunt like this, it's a little different because it's just so unusual. But I mean, it's just like I said at the very beginning, though, every hunt is just different, and like you just kind of have to pick the right tool for the right reality that you're going to be documenting in. But I'd say like overall, I have like kind of my staples in my kit that like are pretty much in there no matter what the hunt is or what the adventure is. I usually always have two camera bodies. I shoot Canon. So the last few years I've been shooting on the Canon R3 and the R5 Mark I. And those have been just amazing cameras for me. They've always done their job, never let me down. I've been bucked off of two horses and thrown my camera off into the snow and had to dig it out. And nothing was broken. There was no water damage or anything like that. I always have like cages on them too, just to have a little bit more protection from a fall or a scrape or whatever. Cause you just never know. Like you never know if your tripod's going to get blown over in the wind I mean, who knows? Like, I mean, hunting is just so rough on gear. And like, that's why gear is just so important. And that's no different with camera gear. But then, I always have a few lenses too. Like I'm a big believer in like a 24 to 105, 24 to 70 millimeter lens, just because it's such a versatile lens, both for photo and video. And kind of depending on the hunt, I'll choose a different one. Like I actually did some on the hunt that I got injured on this year. I was messing around with a 24 to 240 because it was an archery hunt and we were kind of in big open terrain. So there's times where the elk would be, in that awkward distance of like 300 yards where it's like kind of too close for a long lens or a spotter, but I kind of still need to get a shot of them. So I was kind of messing around with that lens because I'd always just kind of shrugged it off as like, oh, that lens is, has a smaller aperture. It doesn't let in as much light. It doesn't produce as good of an image. But now that the lenses that they have now coming out that, so they have those limitations with smaller apertures and things like that. They're still producing like a very sharp image that looks good. And, these cameras nowadays are shooting upwards of 4 to 6 to 8K. So you can get amazing results, with that, and having the image stabilization, and even in the heat of the moment when your heart rate's a little elevated, you're still getting a good crisp image. But yeah, like I was saying, I kind of have like basically a standard zoom in that range of 24 to 70, 24 to 105. But that only covers you basically from sunrise, give or take, to sunset. Like once that light gets into the blue hour, or a headlamp, you need something that lets in more light, so a faster lens. So I usually always run a 35 prime. That's just kind of my favorite prime, just because you're at 35 millimeters, you're wide enough to capture a scene or capture the environment. But you can still, in the middle of the day, you can still blow the background out decently and create a little bit of subject separation and get a creative look on your image, whether it be photo or video. And then if it's, nighttime, you can shoot wide open and keep your ISO down, whether it's, just a guy walking by headlamp or, under the moonlight. And I always loved like I said, going back to the challenge of filmmaking. Like I love the challenge of having to shoot in low light. And so just having a lens like that, it's seriously fun. Like when I get to put that lens on and I'm just like, okay, now is like kind of like when the fun begins in some ways. Cause it's just like, I'm super limited to, just a headlamp. Like if it's cloudy, like there's been several hunts where it's like totally clouded over, there's no moon, and it's all we have is headlamp. And it's like, okay, I got to still tell a story. We're still hiking. We're still doing something. Like, whereas some guys I know, like when it's too dark, they're just like, it's too dark. And that's that. But yeah, I don't know. There's just, you never know what's going to happen.
That's really interesting. I'm going to take that one away. So I'm on a Sony platform. My main camera is the A1, and my go-to is my 24 to 72.8. I live and die by that thing. And I do have a 35 prime. Like that's what I shoot on my YouTube videos and stuff, a 1.4. And I never thought about taking it. And again, I'm at a bit of a weight restriction, so I normally don't bring a secondary lens. But that 2.8 on the 24 to 70 is very limiting. Like there's not a lot of low light stuff, and not the greatest for more artistic shots. Like you're not going to get that bokeh. You're not going to get that separation. It doesn't have the same shallow depth of field as the 1.4, but I love the idea of bringing that 35 1.4 for some of that later stuff and the early morning stuff, especially, if you're doing a mule deer hunt or something like that. Like a lot of your day is taking place before the sun comes up, or even in that, kind of gray hour before you get to that golden hour where most of your other lenses, they're just, your ISO is going to be so jacked up. They're not going to look very good.
Yeah, no, the A1's an amazing camera too. I shot Sony for a number of years. But yeah, I'm just a sucker for a 35 millimeter. Like I just love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, I love the creative limited, ability that you have with it. Like you have to move around that camera in space and time to create the images, and you can get some really cool, unique looks. And I think it's a great combination of like kind of being wide enough to tell the whole story of where this image is at in time and everything like that. But it also gives you that separation where it kind of like just kind of draws you in, because it's like, like it's very close to the human eye in terms of, but also
I was going to say that's what I thought. The 35 is supposed to be the one that's the closest to our own field of view, which is why I think it feels like almost the most natural to people to see that size of frame.
Yeah, it's like natural, but also unnatural, because like you'll see something and it's wide, but the background's still kind of blurred. So it's just like, I feel like it just kind of helps draw you in as a viewer to the image.
Yeah. It's funny now that iPhone has the ability to shoot in ProRes. There's a couple hunts where I'm considering I'm doing, I'm not going to get into that particular hunt. I'm trying to talk less about the hunts I'm going on, because I find when I tell the whole world I'm going on a hunt, it stresses me out, because then I leave on the hunt and I feel like everybody's waiting for me to either succeed or fail. And I realized it's ruining my mental state when I'm out there. And so, I have a couple hunts planned where weight is going to be extremely challenging. And I thought to myself, man, now that I can shoot ProRes on an iPhone, like that's really opening up some options. But it does, like the small sensor and that, like there's still nothing quite like having big glass, big chip, big sensor, like the amount of data. And especially when you get into like color correcting and color grading, like iPhone is just what it is. You start pushing it one way or the other, it falls apart really quickly. Whereas with the big sensors, especially, anyways, we don't need to get too nerdy, but I'm looking forward to experimenting with the ProRes, but I'm already kind of regretful about the lack of abilities that I'm going to have to get that separation and do those other things that you can do so well with the big glass. Have you had any, I guess being outdoors and it's not like you're shooting for hours. So overheating issues, are you looking to move up to the newer R5? Or are you happy with the Mark I?
So that's the whole can of worms, but I would say, so it's so funny to me because a lot of YouTubers and stuff like when the R5 came out, there was a lot of overheating issues with it. Just is what it was. But then they had several updates that actually came out later that like completely negated the overheating issues.
Okay.
And
but of course nobody hears about that. And I'm not a Canon guy, so it never hit my radar.
Yeah. So it's a double-edged sword though. It's like, for one, it's like, okay, Canon, you had the ability to fix it with firmware. Why didn't you fix it off the bat?
Yep. And
two, it's like, I mean, I would say more often than not, I'm not filming for more than, 20 minutes at a time, 30 minutes at a time. So I personally never ran into the issue. And like another thing that a lot of YouTubers, kind of forgot to mention was just like, it would only overheat in the 4K fine and the 8K mode. So 4K fine, for people who don't know, is just when the camera is downsampling 8K to 4K in camera and just putting it in a compressed file.
Right.
So those are the only two modes in 4K 120 that were overheating. But if you put it in just standard 4K, the camera will never overheat.
Right.
But like
and how long do you shoot 4K 120? Like 2 minutes? Do you know what I mean? Like you're catching a guy walking across a stream or some grass blowing or like,
Yeah. So like, but I mean, it's just like with anything, like you got to get clicks, to sell.
Of course.
And so people are always like, oh, Canon with like a fire emoji, or whatever. And it's like, just put it in 4K and it won't overheat. Like it's not that difficult. Sorry, I got my dog out.
No, it's all good.
She wants to go play in the snow. So I'll be right back.
Yeah. No rush.
We have a husky, and so she just loves the snow. But yeah, it's just one of those things. Unfortunately, like people saw it, and where it's like, oh, I can post this and get a bunch of views on everything. But so I have the R5 and the R3, and that R3 is like their newer like kind of pro body, and it's never overheated on me. And I've loved that camera and recommended to a few different guys who also shoot in love with it now. So. But yeah, I know the newer R5 Mark II, they have like kind of the built-in vent system and stuff like that. And it's definitely a lot better in terms of heat dissipation and things like that. And I don't know, I'm just kind of waiting to see what the market does. Cause like with everything, there's, an R6 Mark III coming out in the spring and trying to see what that is. And just like, I don't know, just trying to always make the most calculated guess based on the needs that I have with my job.
I also feel like we're hitting a bit of a ceiling. Like I just did this whole video, like 5 reasons to not buy a new bow this year. And the whole thrust of it was they're not really changing. This is more of like marketing FOMO to make you think you need a new one. Like this ain't doing anything that last one didn't do. They just released the specs on the A1 Mark II. And I'm like, like there's literally not one single thing. Okay. The only thing I want is the like 14 axis flippy screen. Cause that was the only thing. My second camera is the A7 IV, and even it has the flip around screen. And the fact that the A1 has this like ridiculous single axis screen that like I can't even watch myself while I'm filming. And it's like, I'm in Canada. That's like it's almost a $10,000 camera. Like it's crazy. It's $6,500 US, and the screen doesn't even flip around. And I was almost like, I wish they had, like if Canon would say, listen, give us $1,000. You can ship us your camera. We'll put the new screen on it. I would do it in a heartbeat, because that A1 Mark II just doesn't really do anything for me. And I'm probably going to I think they're releasing it at around the same price, but I would take at least a $2,000 hit to sell my used body. And I just don't see $2,000 worth of features in the A2. And here's the other thing. You want to talk about firmware fiasco. Sony is famous for it. Like they'll release features on their lower end line that are just firmware dependent, and they're not releasing them on the A1. And I'm like, hey, flagship guy over here, I paid $6,500. I want these like they had
like the focus breathing
fix.
Yeah.
I was like, And the funny thing is, it's particularly apparent on that 35 G Master, which is one of my favorite lenses. And it's like, how are you not releasing a firmware update for focus breathing on your flagship camera when you've already released it on the lower end? Yeah, they're brutal. They're brutal for that. But
yeah,
I,
every brand has their quirks
100%.
and their little things. Like that's one thing Canon does a really good job of is firmware updates. Like if there's something that comes out, they'll fix it. Like I actually did have the Arc 5 Mark II right when it came out. And I took it on a hunt and I was having like some like weird screen issues. Like my screen would go black and stuff like that. And so I was just like, I called my buddy at Pictureline in Salt Lake and I was like, dude, I love the camera, but I'm having like this weird little quirk thing. He's just like, oh, that's not at all normal. Send it back. So I sent it back and then they sent me a new one. But then it was kind of the unique timing of it is it was right when I got hurt. And I wasn't able to film anything this fall because I blew up my knee on my first hunt of the year. So I ended up just sending it right back, in the sealed box and everything. Cause I was just like, dude, I don't know what the next few months look like for me. Like I'm gonna have to have surgery and I don't know how expensive that's going to be. And so I just kind of got to put everything on pause.
And they're a lot of money, man.
Yep. Yeah.
And when you look at it, like, does it really change your income generating capability? No, it does not. There's nothing you can't do from a work perspective with the Mark I that you can do.
Yeah. Especially this, like you're saying, like the ceiling now, like you can get a great, like a Sony A7 IV or a Canon R6 Mark II for around $2,000 or less.
That's what I tell people. Like that A7, even the A7 III, like there's not I think the A7 IV might do 4K 60. I don't think it does 4K 120. There are very few things that the 4 does that the 3 doesn't do. And if somebody's really on a budget, I'm like, man, you're getting like 75% of what an A1 does for like a third of the cost, if not less. Like they're beasts. Or the A7S the funny thing is 90% of what I do is film. And I almost feel like I should be on the A7S platform. But the size of the chip in the A1 is what keeps me there for photography, because what I've learned is that even though I'm limited with lenses for light, because I've got that 50 megapixel sensor, I can almost zoom in 2x on any shot I take. And I've got like a doubler on my lens and it's still crisp enough to use, especially in like a YouTube film where like it's not up on a big screen, where I think you go down to that A7S, I don't think it just isn't capturing the same amount of data as the A1, for example, although its low light performance is arguably superior.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, like I said, every camera has a different tool. Every lens is a different tool. And you just got to pick the right tools for the right job.
Well, it's like the whole FX line. That's the other thing that I've, when I bought my A7 IV for a backup camera, I was like, should I be getting an FX3? Like they're kind of in the same ballpark for price. And it's like a mini cine camera. I was like, but then I felt like it's a whole other platform. All of my stuff is interchangeable between the two. Anyways, we're going off. The other thing, unless there's anything else like lenses or body wise, how are you handling audio out in the field?
Yeah. Audio is so huge. I would say typically how I handle audio is on my R3, I have a hot shoe where I can just put a little XLR module into the top of it. And it's totally has like a little weather gasket that goes down. So it's totally sealed and just locked in there. And I have 2 full-size XLR ports in the top of it. And then I just have like an XLR shotgun just for audio on top. And most of the time I just will run the shotgun.
What shotgun do you like?
So I've always had really good success with I think it's called the Sony XM1 or something like that. It's a very cheap shotgun microphone. It's about $100.
Oh, wow.
And it actually is the stock Sony microphone that comes with like the FX3 if you get the top handle with it, or the FX6. And it's a great little cheap microphone that does phantom power with XLR. And I've had some of my hunt films, or most of my hunt films, just shot with that $100 microphone and been very pleased with it. But more so it comes from the wind muff, over the top of it, because the mic is only so good, especially out in the backcountry. Like it's always windy in the mountains and everything like that, especially on that hunt in Nevada with trail. Like it was just brutal. Some days were it was insane. But I would say like just getting a wind muff that, is fairly sizable in terms of the little fur on it and stuff like that. You don't want something that's like really, really short, or it's just like the foam sleeve. You want something that has a little bit of that fur to
like full blown dead cat, like the big, you know what I can do right now? Hang on a second.
Yeah, something like
Something
that.
along the lines of this for anybody
Yeah.
watching or listening.
Yeah, and then what I like to try and find the ones that have a little bit of a rubber gasket on the back
Oh,
that fully seal around the microphone. Kind of like if you've ever broken your arm and you have to like stick your arm in that like bag tube thing, but then there's that like kind of silicone donut
yeah.
that kind of goes around your arm and basically just keeps it like watertight from letting water, get in there and get on your cast. It's kind of the same thing. Like I have a couple of those dead cats that have that little like silicone rubber gasket on the back, and it just helps from any wind that might be coming in the backside of the camera and getting in there. Because I've had that be an issue before in the past with some of my audio setups. But yeah, that's just kind of something I've found. And I feel like one of the biggest things when a guy, reach out to me on Instagram, like, hey, I'm having some audio issues. Like, what would you have any like tips or anything? And I'm like, well, send me a picture of your setup. And a lot of times it's just like a Rode mic with just the foam on it, not even a dead cat. And I said, and I was just trying to point him in that direction. I'm like, just get a dead cat for that, and it'll just help massively.
It's crazy how much difference it makes.
Yeah.
Are you ever miking guys up?
Occasionally, like I said, it just kind of depends on the situation. There was a few times in the film with Trail where I did, and then I just had a little XLR to 3.5 mil jack in that hot shoe.
Yep.
Just running that with the DJI wireless mics, and that's always worked pretty dang good for me.
And you like those? I've messed around with a couple different. I have one from this company called Tentacle that's really interesting because they do 32-bit floating point. So for any nerds out there, it means you kind of can't clip. So when you don't have the ability to monitor audio, that's a huge benefit. And I've messed around with that, just wearing it before and then syncing it back afterwards. And then nowadays, everybody is loving. And I got to be honest, I kind of hate the look. The big puffy mics that everybody's using. It's got like the mini dead cat on the top of it, and you can always see it in the shot. I guess I'd rather they have good audio than crap audio, but I do find it's one of those things that like takes you out of the shot when you can kind of see this big microphone. But I've played around with a couple. Logistically, I find the wireless stuff, especially when you're doing your own filming, because it's like if you don't turn on the right thing, or if you're not monitoring it and you're clipping it, I always get a little bit nervous. Are you wearing any kind of in-ear stuff when you mic him up, or are you just watching your levels?
I'm always watching the levels no matter what. I always will have like a pair of like cheap Apple, like kind of like I call them poverty pods, like the wired headphones. Yeah. That you used to always get with like iPods and things like that. I just always have one or two of those in my backpack, just so I can always just be kind of checking or monitoring if there's like scratching or some sort of weird interference from a cell phone or whatever.
That's the other thing that's brutal with those lav mics. I've done that, like recorded a whole YouTube video and the corner of my beard was like, this the whole time. And it's like, okay, the whole audio file is trash now.
Yeah. But yeah, going back to like the wind muff on the thing, like I always have those as well.
Okay.
A lot of times, depending on what the clothes they're wearing, like, I mean, we're oftentimes dressed in layers. A lot of times I'll just try and hide it underneath one of the layers.
Yep.
And then kind of in maybe not on the base layer necessarily, but if it's on an exterior layer or that's like also semi-thin, I can have that magnet holding it in there. And in a place where it's kind of protected from the wind, but also, protected from like any like, beard scratching or anything like that. I've generally found pretty good success with just being able to hide it right there, or somewhere convenient. I know some guys will put on the vinyl harness or other places too, but then you're gonna have to start boosting the level a little bit and your audio quality. Like this with anything, the closer you can get to the source, the more quality it's gonna be.
Yeah, the clip on the hat thing, I did that for one hunt and it worked really good for the levels, but then you just kind of got this puffy mic hanging off your hat all the time. I do think audio is one of the things people find challenging. The other thing that I would recommend to people that's like a very cheap upgrade, because I do think GoPros have their use in adventure films, and there's a media, like a mod upgrade where you can get the little housing for the GoPro and it's got a separate external mic, and then it is only foam. It's not a dead cat, but they have a foam cover on that mic. And I have found the improvement in my GoPro audio has just gone through the roof.
I've been tempted by that too. Like it's
worth it, man. And it's like you're adding an ounce or two. It's not, and I still wear it head mounted all the time. It doesn't feel that much heavier. Like I really think that mod in particular is it gives it a bit more protection. It's got a bit of a shell on it there. Because I do think audio is one of those things. Like you can have some pretty low grade footage, and if you incorporate it with high grade audio, the brain just kind of like overwrites that low grade footage, and you feel like you're in a higher production value piece of content.
100%. Yeah, your brain will process audio before visual.
Yeah.
Even though visual and things travel at the speed of light, audio only can travel at the speed of sound. Our brain still processes it first. I don't really know why.
Oh, that's very interesting. I wonder if there's like a evolutionary perspective thing going on there.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know it just doesn't really make sense, because you think about just the pure speed of both things. You're like, yeah, light should be the first thing your brain, processes with all the cells and neurons and everything, but it's not the case.
Is there any, so there is this company, I think they're called Rugged Ridge or Rugged Cap. They sell these lens covers. And these have been a complete game changer for me. In fact, I think somebody needs to come out with these for spotting scopes, because spotting scopes, objective lens covers are garbage. But are there any like little tools or gadgets or things that you have found that have like been super useful for you in filming in the backcountry?
Yes. Yeah, let me think about this for a second, because there's been a lot. Let's see. I feel like we're pretty good on audio. Talking about that. I'd say like a huge thing for me coming from like DSLR to mirrorless has just been the ability to charge with USB-C, and charging with power banks and things like that. Like I have like, I think it's like 25 or 24 ounces. I have this little solar panel from Anker, and it has 2 USB slots on it. And so I'm able to charge up my USB power banks, which are also from Anker. And
dude, you're preaching to the choir. I did a whole video on Anker. I compared everything under the sun, from like Gold Zero, Dark Energy, and Anker not only blows it all out of the water, it comes in at like a third of the cost. I have the exact same Anker solar charger thing that you're talking about. I love that.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to find that solar charger now. I've been able to find it on eBay, and I've sent some links to some folks to get it.
I think they make it. I'll send you the link. I think they've rebranded under Blue Wave. Okay. Because on Amazon right now, it's the identical solar charger. All the Anker solar chargers are gone, and it's like the same ads and the same, and I think it's called Blue Wave or Blue Moon, but they look identical and they're priced identical. So my thought was, oh, somebody's just done a subsidiary and they're white labeling the Anker stuff as this Blue Wave stuff. Because I was with you. I think I bought mine almost 4 or 5 years ago, and I kept recommending it to people, and nobody could find it anymore.
Yeah, no, and it's like I got one for my dad for Christmas last year, like just because he obviously hunts as well, and just having the ability to like charge your phone, charge your inReach, charge. I mean, it's just the limits for it are just endless. But I've found that to be just a game changer for some of like the hunts I've had that are like pushing a week or more, without access to electricity. Like that's just been the best way to.
And how many battery are you using? Like standard 20,000 milliamp hour battery packs, and how many of those do you tend to bring with you?
2 to 3 typically. Never one, just in case they drop it. Or
I even have a backup 10,000 that even when I'm doing like a 3 or 4 day thing, I'll just throw it in there, because I had it happen to me once in New Mexico. Said I had 3 or 4 lights left, and then got 10% charge on a cell phone, and it went to 0. And it's like, no matter how great those things are, at the end of the day, it's a $50 battery off of Amazon. And so it's like, I'm not trusting my life to a single one of those ever.
Yeah, and I found that the 20,000 milliamp is a good size to weight ratio. I've had one that was 25,600 or whatever, like the limit is before you can't fly with it or whatever.
Right.
And I still have that one, but it's bigger and heavier, and I prefer it. I'm like, well, I can have 40,000 milliamps for like 1.5 times the weight. So that's just kind of been my rationale.
And the 10s aren't half. That's why even if I'm going on a shorter hunt, I'll still take the 20, because it's like the 10s are probably 66 or 70%. I do think there's something magical as well about that 20,000. It seems to be the best bang for your buck as far as price to weight ratio. Yeah,
100%. But yeah, I'd say that's been a huge one. I always keep a little blower, like a little sensor blower, as well, just because you just never know. especially with how dusty some of these places can get. Yeah, I'd say tripods. I've really liked Kreitzer tripods this past year. Really love their stuff because I use the Peak Design clip to put it on my backpack.
Same.
And it's an Arca. And I can just go bing, bing, like right there. And it's just all good to go.
Is it not so nice? I used to have a nightmare, man, because I used to have to use a cotton carrier because they had the doubler. And I would have like the cotton carrier attachment in the middle. And I would have a little Arca over off to the side because I used to be like on an outdoorsman's mounting system. And I find in the last 2 or 3 years, everybody has finally just agreed like everything's going to be Arca. And so now I can put one Arca plate on my camera and the same tripod. I can do my binoculars. I can do my spotting scope. I can do my camera. I can do my GoPro, like everything. And I've just found that streamlined my whole mounting system, very well.
Yeah, no, I've been a huge fan of Arca for a long time. And I also was on cotton carrier for a while, but I found it kind of bulky.
Yeah.
And
same.
I don't know. I love how smooth it is and quiet. Like it's definitely a good.
And the mounting mechanism is a little bit more stable. Like I like that it wraps more of your, like sometimes, especially when you got that 24x70 hanging off there, just having that one thin clip, like my shoulder strap will move around a little bit. Like the cotton carrier was nice for that, but I do feel like overall the Peak is I was Peak, then I went to cotton carrier, then I came back to Peak. I do prefer it
too. Yeah, I started Peak, went cotton carrier, and then the cotton carrier, like for certain things, like if it's a really cold, freezing hunt, like I've had my Peak Design clip freeze on me just because it's metal. It's not like necessarily a flaw of the clip itself, but it's just the material. It's just I've had water get in there, and it's just like I'm wrenching on it, trying to get it, trying to film something really quick. I'm just like, come on, and eventually it'll go, but. Yeah.
The one thing I wish Peak would come out with that cotton carrier has like that chest rig with the ability to have a second rig coming off the side. And I've thought for some of my whitetail hunts, I'm like, oh, this is what I want because I don't need to be wearing binos up here. And I would love the ability to be having, or when I'm just filming other people's hunts, I would love to be able to have chest mounted 2 cameras simultaneously. And I wish Peak would come out with some type of mounting system that's not shoulder strap dependent, so you could wear it without wearing a backpack.
Yeah, no, that'd be sick because I have that same chest rig because I ran that for a while. And then I was just like I kind of missed having binos, and then now I just run it's like a FHF gear kind of chest rig. I forget the name of it, but it's basically just like a bino harness, but
the filming guys at Meat Eater had a lot to say at that because it was like they needed that chest rig, but they were actually using the binocular rig for a chest rig because it was so handy to have front access to all your stuff.
Yeah, because I can put both a small pair of binos and a lens in there and some extra batteries and everything. And I'll usually have that, and then on the front I'll have just like the small pocket on it's like the small Molly thing, or you can put it on the side of your backpack or anywhere just with Molly, and I'll just have like my UV filters, ND filters in that. And so it's just like a quick, easy spot for those. And yeah, it's an awesome little setup. I really, really like using
that's an interesting point. What do you like? So I run just like a transparent UV filter on all my lenses simply because we're beating the crap out of everything. And I'm just trying to protect my $5,000 glass. I've never put on ND filters again, just because I primarily solo hunt and like the time to put things on and off, but all the time I'm in that situation, especially with video, because with photo, you can always just use your shutter speed to compensate for light, but we don't have that luxury when we're shooting video. What do you like to carry for ND filters?
Yeah. So, you can just, when you're shooting video, just crank your shutter. You're just going to get some of that jitter look to your video, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like sometimes you could be wanting to go for that, and ND filters, you're a whole nother thing because sometimes it's like, oh, I gotta unscrew it because it's dark outside now and I need more light, and you can only get you kind of start at like 1 stop or 2 stops and go to like 5 or 6. That's like your general ND filter. And so basically it's like you're always just kind of taking it on and off. So what I've kind of found is like I really like the Nisi brand of ND filters, and you can look up a lot of reviews on YouTube, but most guys are saying that like color contrast vignetting is like the most controlled with this brand, and for the price, it's considerably cheaper than a lot of other brands like Polar Pro and things like that. And they kind of have a unique system too, where you buy a 1-to-5 stop. So most brands like Polar Pro and other places are 2-to-5. So you're automatically starting with 2 stops of ND. So it's like fairly dark, and then you can only go to 5. Whereas this one is a 1-to-5. So it's like it's letting it a little bit more light, which is nice because you can kind of always have it on more often. And then when you want to get to like 6 to 9 stops, if you're shooting at 2.8, f2, f1.4, wide open and like midday sun, instead of like taking that filter off and then screwing on the 6 to 9 stop, you just put on a solid 4 stop that just is held on by friction. And it sounds weird, but like, you basically just place it on and it's like machined perfectly. And it just basically turns your 1-to-5 into a 5 to 9. Yeah. So it turns into a 5 to 9. Cool. And so it's a pretty slick little system. And that's the same with their lens caps too. Their lens caps, unfortunately, that is the one negative thing I found. If I'm putting that lens cap in my pocket a lot and kind of getting it sweaty and just like the heat of, going back and forth, it'll kind of expand because it's all a friction system. So their lens cap is also only held on by friction. And I usually always use an 82 millimeter filter system, but they kind of have like a unique, basically like in order, and this is getting very much into the weeds, but like in order to get around the whole vignetting that usually comes with like an ND filter, they made their filters just like a tiny bit bigger. Okay. Just to help, basically, so that way you have no vignetting at all, even if you're at 5 or 9 stops fully.
So do you just keep a step-up ring on your smaller lenses?
Yep. Yeah. I basically step everything up to 82, and that way I only have to buy 82 millimeter filters.
Yeah.
Or use those, rubber silicone caps. I have those as well. Yeah. It just helps. I don't know. It just helps keep everything easier because there's been so many times where I'm like rummaging through my bag. I'm like, oh, that's a 77. Oh, that's a 72. I need an 82. Or, just if I can keep everything as streamlined as possible, it just helps me out a lot creatively and just saves time.
Yeah. I think, we can nerd out on like what to buy and gear all day. But the biggest tip I give people when they're asking about filming hunts is it's like, use what you're going to have access to. Because if you have this big, thing that's going to take you 5 minutes to pull out and turn on and put all your, like, you're going to miss stuff. Like it's just going to happen. That's the whole reason I started using the peak system. Like unless it's pouring rain or flying snow. And even then I've got those little, I buy them at BH. I forget what they're called, but they're little molded plastic, just covers that you can wear on your chest. And that's why half the time I'd rather somebody just have your iPhone and a GoPro. Like if it's just for your own stuff, because the iPhones these days are bulletproof. You're going to be able to use it in any weather at any time. You can zoom into 5X, which is insane. Like it's going to cost you multiple thousands of dollars to get a 5X zoom in a mirrorless or a DSLR system. And you're going to use it and it's going to be there. So that's been and that's why I went to the 24 to 70, because 99% of the time, that's the only thing that's on my camera. I actually shot at 24 prime for quite some time, but I just found there was too many times when I was like completely missing a shot. Like I remember seeing a caribou at 85 yards on a hunt, and I filmed it and I got home and I'm like, I can't even see this caribou. Like you got to have an ability to reach in a little bit. But I think anything you can do with your system, and that was my other reason as a solo filmer for just not carrying ND filters at all, was just I'd rather a shot be blown out and still get it than me be messing around with something. But again, I love when I'm able to go film other people, because it's so much fun when you can like use the right tool for the right job at the time and have the time to kind of switch up. And that's like this year, for the first time, I went and bought a 70 to 200, which is probably the least used, most expensive lens I could have possibly bought. Like I will probably use it 5 or 6 hours a year. But oh my God, when I was filming other people, like, yeah, you can do stuff with spotting scopes and phone scopes and all the rest of it. But man, like you were talking earlier, even about having a 400, like I've seen what Gritty is lugging around in the film with him, in the field with him. Like when you can zoom in with a big sensor and big glass to 200 or 400, like the quality of shots that you're getting. And I think another thing people don't understand from a photography perspective, we all love using aperture to get that shallow depth of field and get that subject landscape separation. But when you can compress that with those long lenses and get those, like, the lone figure on the skyline with the mountains behind them, and you're shooting it at 200 or 400, and that landscape just looks huge behind him because you're compressing, the foreground with the background. And the only way you're ever going to do that is with something like really big glass.
No, 100%. Yeah, I typically so I have a 7200 as well, but I generally will leave it at home a lot of time. But like I said, it just depends on the hunt. Like I actually did use it on trails hunt quite a bit, and like both kill shots actually were on the 7200. But it was just because I knew that I was going to be fairly close to him whenever it did happen, and I didn't need something like a 100 to 400 or 2 to 600 or whatever. And so typically, like Canon has the lens. It's kind of like a unique hybrid. It's a 100 to 500. So it's kind of like that unique space of like a little bit more than a 1 to 400. And it's the same size, but you get a little bit more range at the cost of a little bit less aperture.
Right.
And it's very sharp. And it only weighs 3 pounds. And so
it's not bad.
Generally, that's the lens I'll run for any sort of wildlife or far reaching landscape type shots. And it's been incredible. And the stabilization on it is the best I've ever used on a long lens. Cause I had the Sony 100 to 400 and it was a great, very sharp lens, but I always felt like I couldn't shoot it that much handheld for video. It was pretty limited, but this Canon is, I don't know what technology they have in it or whatever, but I can seriously I can send you some stuff of me filming like on an ocean, filming some like offshore fishing, and it's like insane. That's crazy. Like with the waves and everything, and it's just like boom, like locked on. But
yeah, I found after I bought the 70-200, I almost wished I'd bought the 1 to 4 because like reaching out 200, and I still forget what would that be 4x 200 because 100 millimeter is about double. And it's like 4x magnification is not that much. I'm like, I wish I had more. The only hunts that I think they're perfect for are like the one, I think an archery hunt is perfect. Like 200 can get you to the point where if you got something capturing the shooter, you can zoom in on what the kill shot is going to be. And you're going to get that kind of quality kill shot that you got on those shots in one good chance, while still being relatively realistic to handhold. Even on the Sony's done some improvement with their image stabilization in the last couple of years. Pretty serious crop factor on their active image stabilization. But anyways, I'm yeah, I love nerding out about gear.
I love gear too.
I'm trying to think of, is there anything else that particularly stood out to you on that hunt or that you think we should cover?
Let me think for a second. I mean, we covered pretty much, I'd say like a lot of the stuff that I think was really interesting, like kind of re-talking about and everything. It was a very unique hunt on multiple different levels. The tag was unique. The scenery, the setting was unique. The creative limitations that were just part of the reality room were super unique. It was just one of those hunts where I was on day 4 or 5. I was just like, man, like not a lot had happened yet. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to edit this one, or, I don't know. It's like, oh man, I just hope it all works out. And then when stuff kind of in the middle of the film, not to spoil too much, like didn't really work out, I was just like, dang, now something really is going to have to work out.
Yeah.
Cause like, it's like, we got a story now. We got some like really good struggle. And you have to have struggle in a story. And it's like, okay, like, are we going to get that like redemption arc, or is it just going to be, this was it and we grinded it out and, did the tag and the hunt justice and left it all out in the mountain and it just wasn't meant to be? Or is it going to all come together in the end? But yeah, it's like I said, it was just a really good hunt. And I'm just super blessed and fortunate to have been the one on that one.
I think too, the lesson here for the self-filmers and for the young guys trying to get their stuff up and going is just like you can't give up on a hunt until the last hour, the last day. You can't give up filming either, because that happens to me all the time, man. I go out on a hunt. First 3 days are just boring as hell. And then it's happened where I just give up kind of from a filming perspective. I don't give up hunting, but I stop taking the camera out. I stop getting the B-roll. I call it transition footage. I find what everybody does really well when they start filming their own hunts, or even if they're working with a small group of people, is they film where they are and then they film where they get to, but they don't take the viewer with like, okay, well, how did you get from A to B? Like, what was the decision-making process? Physically, what did you have to do? And so I always tell people you need more transition footage. So I don't care if it's you walking or hiking or packing up a bag, or these are all shots that you're going to need when you get back that are going to bring your viewer from where you were to where you got to. And I stopped filming that stuff, and and then all of a sudden something cool will happen. And then I'm like, oh shit, now I don't have enough stuff to actually like piece together a film out of that. So I think that was something that both you and Trail did really well. You from a filming perspective and him from a hunting perspective. Like, you just can't stop until last light on that last day, because you never know when that little piece of magic's going to happen.
Yeah. And it's a team effort, like producing a story like that. Like, it takes both the filmer being committed to be like, hey, like I want to like go the extra mile and take the extra time to get this shot or whatever. But it also takes the hunter being like willing to be like, yeah, like I'll drive down the road a little bit and leave you behind just so you can get a shot of me driving towards you or driving away from you. So it definitely, like, it takes two. It's definitely like a team effort to produce a high quality film and just to tell the story fully and to bring, like you said, bring the viewer along. Cause like, it's just there's a time and a place to just get dropped in the middle of it. And sometimes I like to do that. Especially maybe in the beginning of a film or something like that, where you're just like, boom, like you're in it. You're like, okay, I got to kind of figure out what's happening, what's going on. But there's another time where you kind of do need to like kind of tell the whole story. But yeah, just trying to, like, I guess in the editing suite, just trying to navigate that, because the viewer isn't as dumb as maybe we let them on to believe. Like in this film, for example, I never had day 1, 2, 3, 4. Like, you're just kind of on the adventure and you don't know
you're nailing it.
Yeah. I don't know.
And this is such, like, you're getting into some really sophisticated editing, which I love. And maybe I've kept you for an hour and a half already, so we're going to wrap this up soon. But one of the questions I have for you, I have a hard time cutting because I feel like, people aren't going to get it, either from a psychological perspective, like they're not going to understand how long this actually spanned. Like, this is a 12-day sheep hunt. I want you to feel like it was a 12-day sheep hunt. But also, I do think I underestimate the audience's abilities sometimes, and I'm kind of like hand holding them when I don't need to be. Coming back with 20 hours of footage, getting that down to a 43-minute cohesive film. When you're looking at a sequence or a shot and you're not sure, do I leave this in or do I take it out? Are there any particular questions you ask yourself, or do you have like a little decision tree filter type of thing that you're like informally running through in your mind? Like, how do you decide what gets left in and what I can take out without sacrificing the heart of the story? And I understand that's an impossible question to answer because every shot is unique, but just like a general overview or some like tips and tactics that you found helpful for addressing, because it's that whole kill your babies thing. Like, you need to be ruthless with the edit, but then it's like, am I being ruthless to the point where there's no story left?
Yeah. So yeah, for like an example, I would say it's definitely a case by case thing for each film. But I would say, like, for an example of this film, there was a scene kind of near the end of the hunt where we actually got Trail's forerunner stuck in like a ditch. And, but it was one of those things, like, it was kind of a cool little scene. Like, it looked cool. Like, he basically, like, it was like one of those like divots, like this. And basically his forerunner went, eek, and like both bumpers were suspended and tires were spinning above the ground. And so we were both like, oh, this is not good. And luckily there was another hunter there with a Jeep and a winch, and he was able to winch us out. But it was one of those things. I was like, it's part of the struggle. It just shows that, like, his vehicle's getting beat up. It shows a lot of these things that like kind of add,
especially on a vehicle dependent hunt. Like, I would argue, yes, that is very in alignment with the theme of the hunt. Yeah.
And it was hard for me to like end up cutting that. Like, it wasn't even the, GoHunt or whoever that decided to cut that. Like, I didn't even have it in the first draft because it was just one of those things. I'm like, it's an awesome little scene. It definitely adds to the story, adds to the struggle. But unfortunately, it doesn't work with the flow that was already at that point in the hunt. And it would have been kind of weird introducing this guy. And it just kind of one of those things that is, you have to just kind of surrender everything to the flow of the story. And sometimes that means like an awesome B-roll shot or an awesome A-roll shot, which in the case, this was like a really cool little moment of like getting stuck and not sure if like what's going to happen and a little stress. but we ended up getting out and it was fine. But yeah, just things like that, and just kind of watching it. Maybe you put it in there and you let it sit for a day, and you just kind of mentally like put your laptop away and then come back to it and watch it with fresh eyes. I do that all the time. Or I'll have my wife watch something, just because she's a kind of like what I would call like a neutral observer. Like she's a hunter. She understands, the things that a hunt film needs and things like that. But she's also kind of a harsh critic of my work, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'll show it to her, and she'll be like, yeah, like I like it, but it's not like, you don't need it, or actually I don't like it, even though maybe it's something I did like. And then I'll have to kind of check myself and be like, oh, like, why do I like it? Or is it wrong that I like it? Or, just things like that. I think it really helps to have somebody that you like can trust, or whether it's a friend or a colleague or something. You can send them a little draft or send them a little snippet. Like you can just export that part of the film. Like, hey, does this make sense? Is this weird? Or just talk it through them with them. But
it's funny the things and need to be reminded of. I used to be a music producer, and whenever I was, especially engineering or mixing and mastering a song, I would always like have a first go at it and then leave it for a couple days, because especially I really think like physically, auditorily, certain nerves get like beat down, and you're just not hearing things the way they actually are, and psychologically, you can't see the forest for the trees. You're paying attention to this one little snare drum, trying to get it perfect, and you don't realize you've completely buried the vocals.
Yep.
And then you leave it for 3 or 4 days, and you come back, and within like 30 seconds, it's like, oh, I know exactly what needs to be done to finish this. And I know I get so excited to release a film that like when I finally sink down to the editing process, I will go at it ham. And then I'm literally like exporting at like 3:00 in the morning and then uploading. And I need to just chill, get that first cut, shut the laptop, go do something else, come back at it. Because then I think those dead spots leap right out at you. I think you watch it and it's like, oh, the last 3 minutes, like, yeah, okay, it was some nice footage, but like that did not contribute to the storyline at all. I could totally chop that right out. Or I had 8 hiking montages set to music in like 13 minutes. I'm like, people get it. We're hiking. I can go in and cut half of those out, and I'm not going to sacrifice, the storyline itself. So I think that's the thing that's going to resonate with me from this section, is that I need to give myself more time away. The other thing that I'm doing for the first time ever, I'm starting to experiment with an external editor. I've never been able to release like creative control. I'm like, how is somebody else supposed to understand the story I want to tell? And I kind of think that's just all ego. I think if they're an artist and you respect them professionally and they align with you and they understand the space and the type of story, and maybe there's a couple back and forths on the draft and they didn't knock it out of the park the first time. But I think having what I want is like somebody else's perspective on what this could look like. I feel like in some ways as an editor, I've kind of reached my limit, and I think we can only spend so much time in our life getting better, and you really need to decide. And I don't want to be a professional editor. There's other things like gear reviews that like I'm better at, that I think I can be world class at. I don't think I'll ever be a world class editor. So that's one of the things I'm going to start working on, is experimenting with, maybe bringing somebody along to film every now and then. And even when I do my solo stuff, sending it along to somebody and having them edit, and see how that goes in letting me see what a different perspective on this hunt could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's like with anything, the more you do it, the more, you get better at it, like with time. And I've been super fortunate, or I've been able to edit hunt films for, since 2019. So going on over 5 years.
Dude, I feel like we didn't even touch on like background history or
oh, that's fine.
Anything.
That's
like
fine.
I would love to have another conversation about, because like that's what everybody always wants to know, like, how did you end up in this space? But I think diving into some more, because so many people, even if it's just for their own little YouTube channel, or like so many people are interested in filming now. And I think with the democratization of technology, a couple grand, man, you're filming some really great stuff these days. And I think being a little bit more familiar with some of the more sophisticated tactics can like really, it's not that hard to make like really good looking and sounding stuff if you just take a little bit of time and energy. Maybe the last question, how's the injury from the leg? How did that happen in the first place? How's recovery? And then, let's just deal with that. And then I got one last question before I let you go.
Yeah. So the injury is going really well. I actually have my follow-up appointment, hopefully my last one tomorrow. And I'm hoping for being able to be cleared so I can be walking around without the brace. Cause right now I'm just in a straight leg brace. So basically for anyone who doesn't know, I fell on my first elk hunt of the year. First week of December, I was filming with, Nate Simmons of Western Hunter.
Okay.
And it was archery hunt. We were in Wyoming and we were in some gnarly country, and it was honestly in a spot that wasn't too gnarly. It was kind of what I would describe it as, like we were coming down this steep ridge, and there was like a game trail, but it was like a steep, just like heavily packed down dirt trail with a lot of those like small marble volcanic rocks. And basically it was one of those situations where I was like, I got my trekking poles in my backpack, but it's starting to get dark, and we'd already seen 12 grizzly bears this week. And we both were like in the same boat and mindset of like, when it comes to 5 o'clock, we were heading back to camp.
Yep.
Because it's no sense of shooting something at last light, and then we're just competing for, and then we're getting back to camp at midnight, and we're covered in elk blood, and with how many bears there were around, it just was not been a very smart thing. So basically, we would go back to camp at 5 every night. And so we were just coming down this ridge, and it was just one of those things where I was like, it's like a little steep and a little slippery, but I'm it's whatever. I don't need to get my trekking poles out because it's just another thing in my hand, and I'm also trying to film. But had I taken the 10 seconds to stop and get my trekking poles out, I definitely could have caught myself, and probably not have blown out my knee the way I did. Because basically what happened is my left leg slid out like it was on a banana peel, and I just came down like in an instant, and in a single leg squat. Luckily there wasn't any weird twisting or anything. But I just came down so fast, and with the heavy backpack and everything, and I just heard a pop, and my vision went red, and I slid off the trail, and immediately it was just 10 out of 10 pain. And I knew, I was like, it's bad. I was like, I didn't know exactly how bad, and I was just trying to stay very positive, and Nate was trying to stay extremely
it's hard
positive.
not to panic. I've been there, man.
Yeah, and Nate was just incredible, man. Like I couldn't have done any of that without him. He was just a rock for me at that time. It was just calm me down. We stopped and we prayed over my leg, and just basically sat there for a while and just kind of got my breath under me, got control, and realized I'm not dying. There's nothing cut. I don't have any bones sticking out or anything weird. And I just couldn't really move my leg. And so luckily I always carry a compression sleeve, either for a knee or an ankle in my backpack, either for me or whoever I'm with, just because odds are if something bad does happen, it's usually gonna be an ankle or a knee in the backcountry. And so I luckily had that in my backpack, and I was able to get it over my knee, which was already pretty swollen. And basically we were able to stand me up, get on the trail. And when I first tried to put weight on it, there was just no way I could put any weight on it. I was just like, nope, too much pain. And then about 10 seconds went by, 15 seconds went by, and I tried again. And I was like, okay, my body's kind of relinquishing that ability. It was just kind of like, everything was just like in lockdown mode. But I was able to actually put a little weight on it without too much pain. And then we kind of hobbled down to this little saddle, and he's like, okay, I can basically leave you here with the gun and go back and get the tents, and we can just sleep in this saddle, which is about 1.5 miles away, or we can try and get there. And I was like, let's try and get there. Like, if it's only 7 o'clock at night, we got, we're not really nowhere to be. We'd already kind of pulled the plug on the hunt. About 30 minutes before that, we actually had just decided, that we were going to be done, take a few days off, and then go on our next hunt that we had that fall, because I was going to film another hunt for him. And so basically I was like, you know what, with all the bears and stuff, I just don't want to be out here by myself in the dark and everything. And, so we ended up, I was like, if you're down, like, let's just take our time and take one step at a time and just see if we can't make it back to camp before midnight. So that's what we did. We made it back around 11 o'clock, and it was about 1.5 miles we did in 3 hours. So it definitely was slow, but it was dark, and it was kind of nice. It was one of those things, like, I just had my headlamp, and I just was just looking down the whole time with my hand on his backpack. And I just was so focused on the next step, just one step at a time. And then by the time I got back to camp, like, all my adrenaline had faded, but I was still only about like a 3 out of 10 or 4 out of 10 pain. Like, it wasn't terrible. And the swelling was about the same. So nothing was getting worse. And so we kind of got my leg propped up with some puffy jackets, and, got me sleeping kind of like, with my leg up, and I slept really great in the tent, all things considered. And we woke up the next morning, made some food, and packed everything up. And I just took all the light stuff, like jackets and sleeping bags and pads. And I probably maybe had 20 pounds of stuff on my back, and then he had everything else. And then we just did the same thing. I had both trekking poles out, and I just went real slow. And a couple times I had to grab onto him because there was a steep section. But yeah, we did that last 3.5 miles back to the truck with 3,000 feet of decline in about 6 hours.
That's not bad.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad. And we just, like I said, we just took our time, and we got back, and I called my wife, and I was like, hey, so I slipped and fell, and we're not sure how bad it is. Like we're just trying to stay extremely positive, and that maybe I just sprained it or dislocated it, and it's just seized up, and it just needs some, a week or two to kind of unlock itself. And because I was like, I can put weight on it without pain, but I just have no stability.
Yeah.
And so basically, my wife came pick me up in Wyoming, got me back to Idaho, and then we just were like, let's, since I'm not dying, I'm not like, I'm not in serious pain. Let's just kind of wait till, the next week, we'll wait till Monday to go in and see a specialist. We don't have to go to the ER or urgent care or anything. And so we did that, and they checked it out, and we're feeling around my leg, and they're like, yeah, we like can't really feel your quad muscle. And I was like, what do you mean? They're like,
that's what you did.
Well, so that's what we thought. And so they're like, yeah, like basically like that bump on the inside of your thigh, above your knee, like that bump was gone.
Yeah. The vastus medialis, the teardrop.
Yep. Yeah. So basically they're like, yeah, we can't feel your quad muscle. So we think you probably just tore your quad muscle.
Yep.
And I was like, okay.
There's a tendon that it attaches there with as well. That's pretty common for people to pop.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, like that's, I don't know a lot about knees, but I was like, that's relatively better news. It's
reattaching a muscle is better than like some of the ligaments that you could tear, because ligaments don't grow back like muscle does. Yeah. So we were like kind of positive from that. And so basically I just kept hobbling around. I wasn't even on crutches. I was just kind of hobbling around. I probably should have been on crutches, but I was just kind of hobbling around, just thinking, the more I can kind of move it and bend it. And I was trying to bend it on the couch and things like that, and trying to ice it. And they still wanted to get an MRI. So we got an MRI on Thursday, and then I had my follow-up on Friday, and they were like, hey, so we have no idea how you hiked off the mountain because you completely tore your patella tendon. And I was like, oh. And I was just like, I just told him, I was like, it was just honestly God. Like I'm not even that tough of a guy. It was just a miracle. I have nothing. Yeah. I have nothing, to blame it on, or no excuse. It was just a miracle. And I seriously could not have done it without Nate, because without him, I would still be up there, or had an in-reach message out and being on a helicopter. But yeah, they told me, they're like, yeah, it's usually a helicopter thing. Yeah. You just get flown out. So yeah, it was a miracle. And yeah, it was an experience I'll never forget. And so they're like, and so I told them, I was like, well, can I like kind of like get by and just like kind of hobble around, or get a knee brace that's like locked? And they're like, no, you can't.
Yeah, they're like, that tendon will deteriorate. Sorry, my dog's chirping again.
It's okay.
So I was like, I was trying to see if I could get around it. Let me put her outside one more time. And so yeah, basically the doctors were like, nope, you're getting surgery on Monday. We're going to clear our schedule to get you in, because this is a pretty serious thing. And that's what they did. And yeah, that was, the surgery went really well. I was super fortunate to have a really good surgeon, in the Idaho Falls area. And I'm 2.5 months post surgery now, and it's been pretty smooth overall. The first week was rough.
Yeah.
But I'm walking around the house without the brace. I wouldn't call it walking. It's kind of still hobbling.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to do that, and they want me to do that just so I can keep strengthening that muscle back again.
Yeah, rehabs are pretty aggressive these days. They've kind of gone 180 on that over the last few years, and they like you to get as mobile as quickly as possible. And kind of, so what do they do? Do they like drill a hole and reattach the tendon? Like, what was your actual surgery?
Yeah. So when people usually tear the patella tendon, it's my understanding it's usually like an insertional. So usually they'll tear it, down low or up high, and then that kneecap will kind of roll up into the thigh muscle.
Yeah.
But mine, they didn't think that was the case, because my kneecap was still over the general area where it's supposed to be.
Okay.
But basically what happened was, the tendon had been sliced, like basically because of the force of everything, how it happened. But the tendon didn't tear where it attaches. It tore in the middle. Right. And just like a knife just basically just sliced it.
Like sheer force, like it just snapped in the middle, like you ripped a piece of gum real quick.
Yeah. And so, and they told me, they're like, it's not like, it wasn't like, you weren't strong enough or something like that. It was just a freak thing. Yep. And so they basically just told me that. And so they stitched it back together. with the original tendon, I don't have like a cadaver tendon or anything like that. Like they're able to use it and keep everything intact, and then they re-anchored it.
Gotcha.
Basically.
And now you'll probably end up, that's the funny thing, especially about most tendon repair surgeries, is you're going to end up being stronger. Like that patellar tendon is probably going to be stronger than your other tendon now.
Well, yeah, that's the interesting thing. So I had a knee surgery in college, and I had learned through that, because when they went in there and did everything, it was just my meniscus. So it's still a pretty significant surgery, but they had told me that my patella tendon was a little bit longer than it should be.
Right.
And so I told them that at this surgery, I was like, hey, like I do have like a little bit longer of a patella tendon just because I grew so fast in middle school and high school.
Oh, interesting.
So I was like, if you want to like shorten it, you're welcome to. Just because when it's a little bit longer, it's a little bit more loose in the joint. But yeah, I've been absolutely blown away how smooth the recovery has been, and like that they had me putting weight on it that day.
Yep.
Which, like, when I had my meniscus surgery 9 years ago, I couldn't put weight on it for 8 weeks.
Yeah, some of the recovery from some of the. So I got in a quad accident after an elk hunt last year, and I ended up completely severing my MCL, partially tearing my the other 3 crucial ligaments, like obliterated my knee. And I still haven't gone in and had surgery, but that's kind of like, it's like an 8-9 month thing if I actually go in and have all these ligaments repaired. And at this point, I got pretty aggressive with some peptides and some other things, and I kind of have a background in fitness and kinesiology and stuff. So
have you heard of BPC 157?
I'm big guy. BPC 157 and TB 500. I've got it in a drawer right here because it's like when, the stuff hits the fan, that is the first thing that I go to. And I've got a pretty aggressive protocol, 6-week protocol. I have a background in bodybuilding too, so not unfamiliar with PEDs and other, substances that will facilitate faster recoveries. But yeah, knee surgeries can be really challenging to recover from. But something like that, you have no choice, and you will end up being much, much better for it in the long run.
And that was my biggest concern. I'm like, dude, is this going to like ruin me for life? Or like, because like, you always hear stories of like knee surgery.
And it's what you do. That's the other thing. There's no health insurance for what you do, bro. You know what I mean? Like most people out at work blow a knee. They're like, oh, I'm on Easy Street. I'm going to go. Oh, I know. And it's like, I can just imagine the panic and the sense of overwhelm. That's like, it happens to me.
Oh, that was worse than the actual pain.
100%.
I immediately knew. I'm like, well.
And that right at the peak of season. You're in your money making. Like if it happened in December, it's like, okay, I'll sit in the editing room for the next 6 months. But it's like, this is your money making months, and they just got nuked.
Yeah, and we had just sold our house in September, and like it was like you could not pick a worse time.
No,
like that's kind of how it was, and just like the mental battle that it was, and I mean, in some ways it still kind of is, because it was like kind of depressing. Like I'd say the biggest thing that was depressing was I'd gotten my dad an elk tag here in Idaho. It was a pretty good elk tag for a rifle. And we had to pull the plug on it. Yeah. Because it's just one of those things, like you just never know how many seasons you're going to get with your dad. And
totally.
I was like, I don't care about all the jobs and all the missed things like that. Like, I mean, yeah, obviously I do, but missing that season with my dad.
You can do more work. You can make more money. You can't get more time with your dad.
Exactly. Yep. Like that was the hardest pill to kind of swallow and phone call to have with him and tell him what happened. But, I was able to get him a tag this year for 2025. And, awesome. I'm really, really excited for my time with him this year. So
that's great.
But yeah, I'd say going back to injury, like it has been a blessing how smooth the recovery's been. And I was just at PT last week, and I was kind of quizzing them like how I'm doing and, what my timeline is. And cause I was like, I've got a hunt in August, end of August. It's like going to be pretty decently physical. And I was like, what are your thoughts? It's actually a caribou hunt up in Alaska. And they're like, honestly, like you're going to be completely fine. And I was like, really? And I asked her, I was like, I'm going to be off trail. I'm going to be heavy backpack. And they're like, nope, you're going to be fine. And they're like, in fact, you'll probably be jogging by March. And I was like, really? And they're like, yeah. And then I was actually talking to a friend of mine over at Crispy, and he was telling me about his best friend. He's 47 last year, and he blew out his patella tendon playing basketball. And he blew it out in February playing basketball, and he was elk hunting in September at like 90% strength. And I'm like, that's like 6-7 months. I'm like, and so by the time August rolls around, it'll be almost a year.
Yeah.
be 11 months. So I'm
No,
like,
you'll be good. Yeah.
yeah,
The first little bit, it's like a pretty steep recovery curve. Like the first bit is terrible. And then the nice thing about those surgeries is it's like, it is literally stronger than it was before it got broke.
yep,
So once you
yeah,
feel good and that stability is returned, it's like, you don't have to baby it. You don't have to
yep.
worry about it tearing again in the same spot. Like it just
And
the
it's my
way they,
dominant leg. Like my
yeah,
right leg's my dominant leg. So I foresee it being really good. And I'm like, I'm more motivated than ever to just, I'm doing my PT like all the time. Like
that's awesome.
I'm probably still going to keep going like until they say I'm completely fine. But
Yeah.
yeah, because it's just like, I mean, I would hate to just forego, I don't, I'm walking, I'm moving around decent. I don't really need to go. But like last week, they were wrenching on me pretty good, trying to get me down to, because right now I'm at like 110 degrees of bend that I can do before it gets so tight where I'm like, stop.
Yeah.
But they're trying to get me like 120 by this week because it'll be about, I think this week is 12 weeks. But you basically they want 10 degrees every week, more bend. So, but yeah, it's going good.
Well, good on you, man.
Just taking it one day at a time.
Yeah, that's all you can do. I find, especially when we make our livings in the backcountry, the psychological element of injuries is far worse than the physical because I do find that, what if this doesn't? I just had the weirdest thing happen with like a tear in my lat and this other thing. And I'm like, am I ever going to be able to draw my bow again? And like, the sense of panic. And it's like, you just have to like, everything that is broken has healed before. This will heal too. You're not, dead. Everything's going to be fine. But managing that panic, especially when it's, how we make our money. And not only that, it's our passion. Like, I don't know what I would do if you told me I could never go hiking in the mountains again. Like that would be a very psychologically challenging thing. Like that scares the hell out of me. So,
you just have to surrender to the reality.
Yeah. Surrender to the reality. I love it. That brings us full circle. Listen, dude, I want to thank you so much. And not only just for taking the time, but, and I've said this to a couple people over the last few weeks, I feel like the hunts that are being made at GoHunt and the other hunts that you've had a hand in making live in this ideal spot between like Yahoo Sportsman's Channel garbage and like, not that I want to throw them over the bus, but like over the top Donnie Vincent stuff that just doesn't land for me. It's thought-provoking, meaningful hunting content that conveys the essence of like who we are and why we do what we do. And I think it's probably, in the age that we're living in right now, probably some of the best medium for us to be communicating to non-hunters, like what we're about and what's important to us. And with us at risk of like losing all these rights left and praise, I think it's one of the most important avenues for hunters to be communicating in right now. And I appreciate the work you're doing in this space because I think you're one of the guys that's just nailing it. So thank you for the work that you're continuing to do. And I look forward to everything you got coming down the pipe. Obviously I'll put links for you, a couple of your films in the show notes. Anything you want to like let people know is coming or shout out before we kind of log off?
Yeah, I'd say, the premiere of One Good Chance, that was kind of the last film I have in the hopper right now, just because obviously I missed this last season. But I'm really excited for next year. I've already have a couple of things in the works and whatnot. But yeah, it's been awesome getting to know you, Jay, and really good visit. And I honestly could talk for another 3 hours about stuff, and maybe we'll have to do that again.
I would love to do that again, man. And I'd love to hear some background and some,
because we only talked about like history. One hunt, really.
Well, that was the thing. And I was like, my whole plan was like, I wanted the history, how you got into filming, all that other kind of stuff. So yeah, let's 100% do this again, man. I'd greatly appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jay. Really appreciate it.
All right, brother. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You as well.